This podcast may contain discussions of graphic violence, unsettling themes, supernatural phenomena, and other topics that some listeners may find disturbing or triggering. Listener discretion is advised. This podcast is intended for entertainment purposes only. The opinions expressed are simply those of the individual hosts and do not represent the profession of psychology or constitute professional advice.
Welcome to the Secret Passage podcast. I'm Dana Vespoli.
I am Shannon Rogers.
And today we are going to be discussing Insex, that's INSEX.com, BDSM and our relationship to suffering. Before we get started, Shannon, did you travel down any interesting secret passages this week?
I don't know how interesting it is, but I definitely spent way too much time on Twitter, X. I've sort of 95% of the time I call it X now,
Mm-hmm.
but I miss Twitter.
Yeah.
I like that name better. So I spent a lot of time on X. It's easy to go down rabbit holes, and I went down many rabbit holes, and I'm having to now practice. I'm having to abstain and sort of like set up parameters for using it. Otherwise, I would spend my entire life on that app.
Oh yeah. That kind of moves very, very well into my passage that I traveled down and have had trouble also kind of pulling myself out of, and that is the whole Diddy issue.
Oh my
which
God.
I'm sure, I mean, you and I talked about it a little bit. You can't, that's the thing with social media though, is you cannot get away from news. Any kind of news, celebrity news, politics, all of that. It's hard not to kind of get pulled into it. But fucking A,
Oh my
Diddy
God.
and his freak offs.
I know. I think my prediction is he's going to get Epsteined.
Oh, big time. When I read that he was on suicide watch, I'm like, I remember someone else on suicide watch.
Who had a lot of incriminating evidence in their back pocket.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. It's so weird to see the photos of him and it's funny how like through all these little breadcrumbs you find on
Mhm.
X, you start to put together a picture. And like that's how we are as humans, right? We have like pattern recognizing, pattern seeking, and then I catch myself sort of creating a narrative about it based on what I'm seeing. And then I have to wake myself up and be like, this may or may not be true. Like,
Sure.
that Diddy raped Justin Bieber. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it may or may not be true, but this is the stuff you see and hear. And I mean, what do you think about all that? The parties and
I will say this as someone who has had proximity to people with a lot of money and power just from sex work, and stuff. It's the weirdest, most corrupt people that I have come across are not sex workers per se. It's the people that have the money that buy the sex workers, right? That create these kind of elaborate fantasies that they want to, kind of participate in or sort of create to observe. I mean, it really isn't surprising. I feel like there's a point at which you feel indestructible and high on your perceived power and influence and all that. So I mean, the one thing that we know for sure is that Diddy is terrible. I mean, the video of him beating the shit out of Cassie was was hard to watch. I mean, it was terrifying. You know, you saw the video, right? They showed the, I want to say, security camera footage. It was in a hotel in a hallway, and she's running from, and he's just in a towel, and he's just beating the shit out of her.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that a while back before this happened.
Yeah,
Um, it's the wildest thing, given all like the depraved things that they're saying have happened.
sure.
The most disturbing image to me that I saw was the, the massive amounts of baby oil that they confiscated from his house. Did you see that
Yeah,
picture?
that's a lot. I mean, here's the thing: a little bit of baby oil goes a long way, but also when baby oil gets into your privates,
Yeah.
there had to have been a lot of yeast infections going on, like after those freak offs. I'm sorry, like
I
that
mean, oh,
baby
the
oil and the smell of it. It's
yes.
like I mean, I'm like, why not just use lube? Just use lube or coconut oil. Because if the coconut oil gets into your privates, you're okay.
Exactly. Well, or yeah, I mean, wouldn't even jojoba oil do okay? I mean, I'm just thinking about the baby oil and the association with baby oil
Oh, yeah. Okay. Wow.
too. I
Yeah.
mean, that is really, really disturbing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
It,
it and also the like young people were involved and
yes. Yeah.
mhm.
How it's what's so interesting is it shows like how we're all collectively, um, we're all collectively so jaded. You know, I mean, there's these like, gosh, I mean, heaven knows what the hell is going on at these freak offs. And our thing is, what the hell do you need that much baby oil for? How is he walking without slipping on his floors? Like that is the image that like there's a lot of people talking about. Like, what is with all the no, for sure. And I didn't even clue in because of course I'm thinking like this is a man who has like he loves to spend money, this guy. And there's way more there's better kind of lubricants out there than baby oil. And you bring up a very good point, which is what's the other thing he's associated with, and it's pedophilia, and then what baby oil is and all that. I didn't even think about that, but that makes total sense. And again, for all the listeners, this is all alleged except for the thing we saw with the security thing with Cassie, and even then, I suppose we're supposed to say all of this is alleged.
Mhm.
But it's all out there. It's everywhere. It's everyone keeps talking about like the things that are going to come out, the things that are going to come out. I'm like, nothing's going to fucking come out. We're not going to know what's on those tapes.
God, I know.
We're
I
not going to
mean,
know. I mean, that's one thing I will say is that we are still fucking waiting to find out, names with Epstein's Island and stuff, and with Diddy, if and these pictures are surfacing with him with all of these different kind of important people, which I also want to add, just be for heaven's sake, like, it's like let's say you got a backstage pass to go meet Diddy at a concert a million years ago, and then you get a selfie with him because he's famous and you went to his show, and then you become a celebrity or whatever, and then they start linking you with him, and therefore that means you were at a freak off.
mhm.
That's not really fair. I don't think that every single famous person that he is pictured with is somehow in on everything. Just the
Mm.
people that he was in regular contact with, sure, um but there's all these things that are going around, and at the same time, if all of this proves to be true, and there are people that were involved, that are in positions of power or whatever, we'll never hear about it.
Yeah, I don't think so. I
No.
mean, yeah, I doubt it.
Yeah,
Unless, I mean, many, 50 years from now, maybe when everybody involved is dead.
sure.
Um, but yeah, it's just, and it just sort of made me think about, and I know we have to get to the
Yeah,
topic of the day, but it also this dovetails with it. I mean, I
it
can't
does.
imagine it's like a chamber of horrors in that house. And but just if well, I guess I'll stop there. I was going to go into think more of my thoughts about it, but I think maybe we've said enough about old Diddy today.
Yeah. Oh my heavens. But yeah, it does kind of, it dovetails in. insofar as freaky activities and the internet and getting sucked in. So, Insex, which is, I know that last time we made mention of it and didn't spell it out, and so it could be confusing, like insects as in bugs. But it is Insex, INSEX.com, was a BDSM website that existed from 1997 to 2005. A documentary about the website was released in 2009, where the creator of Insex, Brent Scott, was interviewed, along with some of the models and people who worked behind the scenes for Insex as crew members. The name of the documentary on Insex is called Graphic Sexual Horror, which is a fitting title and is also included in the content warning when you go to enter the site. But before we delve into the story of Brent Scott and Insex, we should discuss what exactly BDSM is, as some of our listeners may not actually know what it is or only have an E.L. James 50 Shades of Grey level of understanding. Let's start with the definition. BDSM is an acronym which stands for Bondage and Discipline, Dominance and Submission. Merriam-Webster defines it as sexual activity involving such practices as the use of physical restraints, the granting and relinquishing of control, and the infliction of pain. This is, of course, a very rudimentary explanation. But Shannon, what is your understanding of BDSM?
I have a very foggy, fuzzy understanding of BDSM, both as just a regular old person. Like I'm in, in my life, my friend Jen defines her own sexuality as sexy vanilla.
Sure.
I feel like I'm kind of sexy vanilla. And so I never really was very interested in it, just as a thing.
Sure.
And as a therapist, I think maybe this is where I take a little bit of time to talk to our listeners about who may not know, but
Sure.
Most therapists, like when we start out, we have a very broad education in our master's degree programs. And, people who are psychologists who have a doctor of psychology, which I don't, I have a master's, they were given like a broad kind of education. And then as we start to work, I think psychologists delve a little deeper maybe into a specialization when they're in their initial trainings. But really where we develop our specializations is when we're working and getting additional training along our career paths. So I work with a broad range of concerns, and I do have some things that I specialize in, and this is not one of them, but there are therapists out there who work with the kink community and people who have alternative lifestyles and stuff, and that's kind of their specialization. So I was happy to do this episode because I don't know a lot about it. I have thoughts about it, and my understanding is like it's kink, right?
Yeah.
And it's, something most of what I've learned about it though comes from you. So I think, my understanding is that people engage in this because they get something out of it. And I think it's different for everybody what they get out of it, different for each individual. I have heard that, BDSM practices, although when you're doing them, there is a risk sometimes that, if you do have trauma, it could get sort of have traumatic memories surface, and it could be sort of re-traumatizing. But I've also heard the opposite, that it's quite therapeutic and can actually be very helpful for people who have traumatic history and even sexual trauma. So, so that's basically what I know. I know people get tied up, they get caned, they get whipped, that's really kind of it.
Yeah, and I mean that definitely is a part of it, and not for some. Some have aversions to, I guess, like caning and whipping and all that would be called like considered impact play. For some, it's they just want the kind of psychological aspects of like master and servant and all that kind of thing. But yeah, that seems to be, there was, I remember when 50 Shades of Grey became really popular, and then of course the movie with Dakota Johnson, and it was very glamorous, the way it was depicted and stuff. And for Brent Scott, no, it is not glamorous at all. It's
No, it's like steampunk serial killer
that's
aesthetic.
the way of describing it. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about Brent Scott. So Insex was created by Brent Scott. He was a former Carnegie Mellon professor who engaged in BDSM long before the development of his website. In the documentary, he describes the moment he realized that BDSM appealed to him when, as a young boy, his cousin, who was into Wonder Woman and played with a lasso, had fun tying him up. At one point, Brent had to pee and indicated he needed to be let go, but his cousin and her friends held him down and tickled him, which resulted in him wetting his pants and also resulted in sexual arousal. When he was older, he traveled to Japan during his military service and discovered Japanese rope bondage and bondage performance. He had originally felt a lot of shame about his burgeoning BDSM predilections, but realized in Japan the attitude was different. The primary draw for him was the artistry and intricacy of the ropes. Brent went on to engage in BDSM with women, primarily as a dom, but perhaps also as a submissive. I had the impression in the documentary that he also enjoyed submitting, although they didn't really delve into it. And certainly his, being tickled and being in that submissive role aroused him. So I think it seems he's primarily a dom, but will also sometimes submit. He explored BDSM through painting and photography and eventually put on performance art installations of his work, which featured women in intricate bondage. It was a 1980 filmed piece called Worm that resulted in the FBI coming to his door and looking in his dark room and through his things. In the piece, a woman is restrained, covered in what looks like a head-to-toe body stocking, and parts of her face and body sewn with needle and thread. Ultimately, law enforcement realized that there wasn't anything they could really do as everything was consensual. The feds showing up at his door foreshadowed what ultimately became his greatest creation about a decade later. So when he ended up at Carnegie Mellon as a professor in 1995, he soon discovered he would never be granted tenure because of the kind of work that he was doing, which infused bondage into various media. In the documentary, he says that his final meeting with the dean of students came down to Brent Scott saying that if they were not going to allow him to teach their children, then he would corrupt them. This brings us to the creation of Insex. Brent stood to lose everything when he started the site. He went into debt buying the computers he needed. He learned HTML and all of the things he needed to manage the site. But once he launched it, very quickly, he made more in 2 weeks than in an entire year of teaching. Brent was doing something groundbreaking in the way BDSM was depicted in pornography. One former subscriber explained how bondage videos and photography up to the point Insex launched was sort of ham-handed. The models were tied up with clotheslines all haphazardly, and they were wearing lingerie. The examples they showed in the documentary looked super amateurish, like someone playing at BDSM rather than something expert, raw, and real. Brent Scott had a clear artistic vision and a genuine reverence for BDSM. His videos were grainy and gritty. As the former subscriber described it, it felt like you were watching real women who were captured and then tied up and tortured. They were naked, screaming, writhing, trapped in cages, tied up and contorted, or suspended from the ceiling. This is probably a good time to reassure everyone that the models were all willing participants, many of them enthusiastically so. Some were well-versed already in BDSM, and some were new to it but curious. The models were paid very well and informed the crew of their hard limits. Hard limits being certain acts that they absolutely refused to do. Examples of hard limits might be no blindfolding, choking, verbal humiliation, etc. Models were also given a safe word, which would stop all activity at once. The one caveat, however, was that if a production had to stop, the model would not be paid and would not be asked back for another shoot. Insex became really successful pretty quickly, eventually pulling in millions of dollars a month, and allowed Brent to create more intricate and elaborate sets, including a farm in upstate New York. Brent admits that all of the money and his newfound ability to make these sets turned him into somewhat of a monster. He became more and more ambitious and butted heads with some of his crew. In the documentary, Brent seemed a bit like a mad scientist. He'd have an idea, like the tank of water, where glass ended up not being strong enough to withstand the pressure of the water and then breaking, thankfully without a model inside. It felt like although they had safety protocols in place for their productions, there ceased to be a true recognition of limitations. Eventually, the Department of Homeland Security pressured the credit card companies attached to Insex to pull out so that the subscribers could no longer renew their subscriptions, and Insex shut down in 2005. Many of the crew went on to work at kink.com, and Brent now runs a few less extreme BDSM sites. Although you can go to Insex now and see, I guess, like the back catalog of Insex shoots, and then also some of his newer stuff through Infernal Restraints and other sites. So that is the nuts and bolts of Insex. And I should mention, I heard about Insex actually in early 2005. There was one adult performer that I knew pretty well, and she loved like rough scenes and things like that, and she really wanted to go and work with Brent Scott, and she showed me the site, and I was like, this looks like a horror movie. It's interesting because I can appreciate there is like the artistry of it. And we had talked about Joel Peter Whitkin, who was a photographer, and he took pictures of really grotesque things like corpses with like flowers coming out of like the the body cavity, or a decapitated head on a table with a pitcher of water and fruit or things like that. He was sort of like incongruous kind of imagery and finding the beauty in the grotesque. And I feel like that is what Brent Scott does. It certainly is not for everyone, but you have to admit that the imagery is compelling. Like if we're going to like not think about what is actually happening, seeing a woman in latex tied up to a pole in the middle of the woods is it's definitely a startling and provocative image, and disturbing. Like it's all very, very disturbing. But I just remember seeing the site for the first time in like some of the trailers on the site and thinking, this is really scary,
Yeah, when I watched the movie, so I came into this kind of cold, and I just watched the movie like 2 weeks ago. And what I kept thinking was, how much influence did he have on films like, because the aesthetic seems, I just kept thinking of Saw and Hostel.
Yes.
And Saw came out in 2004, Hostel 2005. And I feel like, God, I wonder if he had an influence on these directors, with the traps and the kind of, just the overall aesthetic. It is that it does have that serial killer kind of quality. And like it's in somebody's, torture dungeon, but it's in a way it's beautiful. The ironwork, I loved the ironworker. He was like my favorite person in that documentary. It's iron, right? He was working with iron.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, and just sort of, well, there's like an artisan component. Um, and there's like, as a kid and all through my life, I think all of us maybe in some ways, or some of us are probably totally repulsed by it. But if you're not and you're kind of drawn to it, when you look at instruments of torture from the past, I feel like there's something very disturbing about that impulse, right? To do that to someone as a punishment.
Sure.
And you think about the Dark Ages, and you think about all the ways they sort of the ways they came up with to torture people. It reminded me of that, just of like the Dark Ages torture devices
Yeah.
that you see drawings of. And
Yeah. No, it's if you hear some snoring, it's Bruno, my Frenchie. So yeah. That is, I think that it's one of the things that really stands out as well, is that these models were willing participants. And I suppose that we should talk a little bit about why BDSM. Like
Yes.
why would someone seek to suffer? You could make the argument like that our, that is the primary, goal. The outcome you seek is through the act of suffering as a submissive. That there is an end goal, and it's to be
Yeah,
broken.
tell us what you know. Tell everybody. This would be a good time for you to share kind of your experience
Yes.
and how you see BDSM and what people get out of doming or subbing or topping and bottoming. I don't know what do people use?
You can
Both?
use both.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and again, this is entirely my own perspective. It is everyone is going to get something different out of the experience of either subbing or doming. I've done both, and I'm not a lifestyle BDSM person. It's not anything that I mean, I've gone a year or two without engaging in any BDSM. And then even more so now, I'm usually hired to dom. So my interest in BDSM actually came during college, when I was in college. And I am not exactly sure what was the initial kind of draw. It might have been something, I just remember asking to be whipped with a belt one time by a college boyfriend who was, hesitant at first, kind of intrigued, verified that that is what I wanted. And I enjoyed the stinging of it. And so my entry into BDSM exploration happened long before I was ever a stripper or, a pornographer, porn actress, all of that. So it was something that I was exploring. Also, biting was something that I was really into. And I kept it a secret. It's nothing that I shared with anyone because I also had some shame around it. So, less so when I got into the adult industry and there was obviously there's a big cross section of BDSM and pornography. Some people within the porn industry are very much into BDSM, and certainly, as we know with Insex, there's quite a bit of BDSM content out there. So one thing that I will say, as a submissive, that the pleasure that comes from the pain, um, I would say you makes you feel very much alive. You feel very, very aware of, your feeling. You feel it forces your focus to the present. It forces you to be aware of what is happening where you are at all times, like that kind of acute sensation. It does hurt, but it's interesting. My boxing coach has such an interesting kind of take on pain, because obviously in sports, pain is very much, a part of it, especially, with your training. And, he's a boxer. Um, and, uh, and he said, pain is just information. It's just your body, giving you information. And it's such an interesting way of looking at it, because I think I had asked him, like, how do you deal when you're, suffering? It wasn't with, like, in the boxing ring, but like in training,
Mhm.
in pushing your body on, like, the rowing machine, or running up hills, or um, anything like that. And he just sort of viewed it that way, in this very kind of stoic way, like pain is information. You're just,
Yeah.
you just, it's telling you something. And I suppose that is the message. You are alive. You are alive. You are here right now. Be here now. I'm someone who loves to dissociate. So it would force my attention to the present. And it breaks you down. And
Mhm.
chemically, I mean, you could look at what's happening chemically even. I cry. I mean, a successful session for me is when I come out tired and crying. Not crying because of pain, crying because of frustration. Um, and I have a pretty high pain threshold, but, like, I would get frustrated um, with things. And that breaking down, um, it is very therapeutic. And I suppose, like you were saying earlier, with people that where they're re-traumatized during BDSM sessions, which I feel like we see at one point in Insex, and we'll get to that. If you go in with awareness, it really can feel like a release. Um, I know that there have been some people who have had those kinds of breakthroughs where they've gone in with the goal of that in mind, is to have to, like, to confront or acknowledge something. I'm not saying it's the best way to handle. I suppose that if you can come out of it and feel that sense of empowerment, that's good, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and then the responsibility of a dom in that situation is to not be a sadist. I mean, certainly you're performing these sort of, the punishments, or, restraining the person, whipping the person, if it's degradation that they want, providing the degradation, the pain that they are inflicting on the sub, or, the verbal, like, degradation, or whatever it is that has been agreed upon between the dom and the sub. um the dom's role is to take the sub to a level that is their sweet spot, their subspace, where they are getting something out of the experience. The dom's role is to never override. Um, and the bottom line is, that the submissive is actually in the, you could make the argument, the sub is in the power position. They have given the dom the gift of their power, and the
Mhm.
dom's job is to provide this service to the sub. It's to help them transcend, basically.
And in that
Um,
relationship, you've told me this before, like, it's, like, all kind of all about the sub. And when you described it to me, it's like there has to be a lot of, like, really clear communication, and there has to be, like, there's a deep trust in this relationship.
the dom, at the end of the day, the dom ideally should be incredibly compassionate and empathetic. I mean, that's my opinion. I mean, people
Mhm.
are welcome to argue with me, but this has been my experience, that a dom is actually in a they're providing care. They're there to help you. They're not there to hurt you, or you could say they're there to help you through hurting you. I've worked as a dom, and it is exhausting because you have to be so mindful. You have to be hyper aware of the sub and keeping them safe, making sure that they're not being pushed too hard, that they're being pushed just enough, and you have to keep your eyes and ears open for their safe word. If their safe word is like red or tabletop or whatever word that's agreed on, or a certain motion that they do. You have to be mindful of that. I'm not saying that there are some doms out there that completely disregard. And honestly, this brings us back to Brent Scott. There's a scene in the movie where a girl is in a chair. I think she's tied up, and it's a live show, which you should say, like, the live show was the kind of the bread and butter of the Insex website, because subscribers could log in, watch the live show live as it's happening, type in requests of things they want to see. Now, which doesn't mean that Brent Scott was going to fulfill every request, but it gave the subscribers power that I thought was, questionable.
It definitely
at one
impacted
point,
the dynamic.
it really did. And so a subscriber wanted Brent Scott to slap the girl. The slap was a hard limit. That was a hard no for her. And he did it, and she was hyperventilating. She was so upset by it. And he continues to he mocks her. And then he accuses her of being a brat and all that. And then he does the thing where he's like, we can stop this. Do you want to stop this? Do you want to stop this? And she doesn't want to stop it, but she's appealing to his humanity. She's like, I said I didn't want that, or something to that effect.
It's funny because the whole interaction is so weird. It's like he didn't remember that that was a hard limit. He slapped her. You could totally see her just completely shut down and dissociate and go into like a trauma response.
Yeah.
And she was trying to whisper to him, but she wasn't making it clear. She wasn't saying, I said that was my hard limit and you just crossed it. She didn't say that clearly. She was kind of whispering it to him. And then he kept saying, what, dear? What, honey? Blah, blah, blah. And like in a nice voice, but with a little bit of a menacing tone. Yeah. And he kind of, he accused her, which I understand that this is part of their dynamic, but he accused her of trying to have control. And she, I think she was just trying to express, like, I mean, she was trying to have some control by saying that's her hard limit. But then you could see the whole conflict in her around, can I really even set limits with him? Because if I do, I won't get paid and I won't get asked back.
And therein lies the rub, right? With the money thing. And a couple things. One is, it was a live show. Someone else was requesting something. Brent Scott delivered it. So who is in control?
Right.
And then we've got the money thing for Brent, which is the subscribers who are relying on him to provide them with entertainment. And then you have a girl who, yes, there's the illusion of control, which is, models, you can stop this at any time. But what does the model in that situation understand? That there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, because there were so many subscribers watching this live. She was struck in the face. She's scared now, because what does this mean? What does this mean for the rest of the shoot, possibly, that all her hard limits are going to go out the window and she's going to be mocked? And so it's, this is where I had issues with what was, I don't know what I'm trying to say. The notion that the models can stop the shoot at any time, and it's true they could, and it has happened, but we have to look at what happens when you're paying the submissives in the situation.
Well, they
You've
made a
got
ton of money. So that, right, they were paid really well to do this.
yeah,
And the general vibe, although it was implicit, it was the general sense was if you do assert your limits, if you do say, use your safe word, then um you're gonna make less money because
mhm,
the more ratcheted up and the more the further they went, the more money they made.
right.
And then if you and then you wouldn't make as much money and you wouldn't be invited back. That was the general sense of. And so then you have like, and money is like a powerful reinforcer. It's
Yes.
it's connected to your survival and who knows, like, in terms of our hierarchy of needs, like,
Mhm.
you know, uh financial stability and survival is pretty up there, I'm assuming, for most of these women. Um so yeah, I mean, it's like the choice, there are a lot of factors weighing on them to. Mhm.
Yes. We could even go so far as to say that there are some models that showed up to, audition and be a part of this, strictly for the money.
Right. Of course.
And it taints what the BDSM kind of practice can mean, because at the end of the day, I mean, in this realm, it was pornography. It was depictions of things. I mean, the things were really happening, but I just think anytime money enters into we're commodifying these acts and bodies for money, it um things get dangerous.
Well, then you also change the fundamental dynamic of that relationship. It becomes a
Yes.
more like it's instead of it being the dom and the sub alone together doing this thing, it so reminds me of all the horror movies that have come out since that involve like this cabal of wealthy voyeurs that are like watching people be tortured
Hmm.
remotely, like that was that escape game movie that I love.
Yes.
So it reminds me of that. It's like it's not no longer just the two. And the dynamic between the two is influenced by these people who are just simply voyeurs and are not involved in the action, but are controlling the action and to some degree, right? Because he was trying to please them.
Yes, and that's kind of where it becomes, it gets really muddied, which is, let's say you take a session, right, between a dom and a sub, and those sessions just by themselves are very, very intimate and safe and private, presumably, unless your kink is also to be like, maybe have people in the room humiliating you or observing, whatever. But even then, these are it's still private, because it's still this smaller community. That then you have Brent Scott now relying on money from the subscribers, and you've got the model relying on money also from the subscribers via Brent Scott. And then you've got all of these people who don't, who are observing and controlling the action. And they're the ones with the money that are paying into this thing. So who's it for and what's it about? That's where I find it disturbing, and that sort of like brings us into this idea of, like, we've talked about, like, why seek suffering, and then why do you want to observe other people suffering?
God, I have so much to say about this. Like, I did a little bit of research because I wanted to understand the neuroscience behind it, and this
Right.
kind of ties into so like the suffering. So the way that what your boxing coach said to you is something that I say to clients all the time, which is pain is not the problem; it's information, and usually it's information about something that matters to you. And I'm talking about emotional pain mostly,
Right.
right? But pain is information. And suffering and pain are different in the sense, in my mind at least, in that like pain is inevitable. That saying, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional.
Right.
Um, you know, suffering is basically pain with no acceptance. It's like how you wrestle with pain and fight with
Right.
pain and have thoughts about pain. Um, so I think that there is something in here in terms of like the practice of it and maybe the watching of it. Um, and I'm just going to talk just real quickly about what I got to in terms of how it's therapeutic or how there might be something in it that, that's therapeutic or useful. I was thinking about like, why do people do this? Like, what do people get out of this? And so I'm not a neuroscientist. When I get too much detail about that, I just want to fall asleep. But, in general, when you're in one of these roles, and I don't know about the viewer, but like when you're in one of these roles, actually participating in it, you get like cortisol increase, you get endorphins, you get dopamine, you get all these things. And it seems like bottom line, give, there's some kind of inherent reward component to both pleasurable and painful experiences. And some people think that has to do with salience, like it has to do with like how it gets processed. It's like meaningful or something. It has some kind of inherent, reward. And so it makes sense that people would do it. But what I was thinking is like exposure. So like we all avoid pain, right? We all don't want to have pain, because any organisms that sort of don't listen to their pain and get away from the thing that's causing them pain end up dead really
Right.
quickly. I think that's just in us. But with in experimenting like this, where it is actually safe and there is a lot of trust, you get to it's like an exposure therapy. You get to get up really close to pain and not avoid it. And there is something inherently, I think, like gratifying and rewarding about that. And also can help you, be more courageous in some ways and not be so afraid of pain. Emotional or physical. All right, that's my little.
It's interesting that you say that because I know that BDSM is, it's linked to sex and sexual gratification and all that kind of stuff. And obviously we see people who are into pain because it gets them off, right?
Mm-hmm.
I never had a real sexual interest in BDSM. I liked the acuteness, but it didn't turn me on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
getting spanked is one thing. Because I think even the most vanilla person can get into like a little spanking, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like the impact play was, I just liked the I don't know, I liked the acuteness of it. It
Yeah.
was, but I
It
also,
focused you too. I think you really liked that part
yes,
too.
and also I don't mind in boxing. I never minded getting punched in the face. I didn't mind it. I was like, whoa, I'm awake.
Yeah, well, no, I think there is. I mean, immediately, I think our brains adjust around that.
Yeah,
We get a little, and I cannot retain the actual like play by play of what happens chemically,
sure.
but it's there. I mean, there is something inherently rewarding. We get some dopamine, we get some endorphins, we get cortisol. The interesting thing I learned, which I think really connects to the slap, the slap in the
Sure.
documentary, is that what I heard about BDSM and scenes and the neurochemistry is that you need to have a warm up, like with exercise,
Mm-hmm.
because it gets the chemicals moving in a way where like you already have the endorphins and the dopamine by the time you get deeper into the play.
Right.
And so I think he slapped her too soon, and she didn't have any of that going, and it was like, oof, because they said there's a danger in jumping in too quickly with no warm up, and that makes a lot of sense neurochemically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny, another thing to liken to, the first round usually in a boxing match
Mhm.
is to both fighters are feeling each other out.
Mm.
It's like a warm up. They're feeling each other out. They are kind of gauging each other. Which I guess maybe it's not the best analogy because at the end of the day, if one of the boxers can overtake the other right away, they will. But
But I
you're
can
getting
see
a
how
sense of each
that
other.
yeah, and I can see how that would raise cortisol because you have
Yeah,
stress response. You're like,
right.
you're in there, you're kind of anxious and feeling each other out. Do you throw punches when you're in
Yeah,
that yeah.
you're throwing punches, but you're also moving.
Mhm.
Not a lot usually happens in the first round, um, but but yeah, in a sense, you've got to suss the other. I mean, it's I think a responsible dom um, is um, is wants to also present themselves as trustworthy
Mhm.
and also gauge their sub. Why on earth would you want to like rush in and torment the person immediately and catch them off guard? Like it's not a contest. Again, you're there for the sub. But that's my philosophy around it.
Mhm.
It's some people may argue, um that is you know my take. And so absolutely, warming up is advisable. But again, that we see that in the live stream, Brent Scott sees somebody wants him to slap her. And so he does. And again, it's like, who's controlling this?
Yeah.
Who's
He's not reading
running this?
her, he's reading them and he's motivated by the money.
And he's motivated by the live stream and not the model. And
Mhm.
that's where it goes wrong. And then again, to get back to like the people who are watching, um, there's the book I revisited when we were watching Insex, called "Regarding the Pain of Others" by Susan Sontag, and and I mean, it's mostly about images of war
Mhm.
and war photography and images coming out, and what it does to the observer, to the viewer. Does it inure them to the pain of others, to the horrors of war, or does it elicit compassion, sympathy, empathy, and all that? And I think about that. I can't help but believe the former. Honestly,
Mhm.
I think we are incredibly jaded uh, by by images of people in distress,
Mhm.
um, and it's easy to then stop seeing, like for the person that wanted him to slap this girl, the subscriber that had typed in requesting to see that. I don't. What is he getting out of it?
Mm.
Is he jacking off watching it happen? Does he want to see her upset? Like what? I understand the dynamic between two people, in this case, a dom and a sub, having this exchange together, right? There,
Mhm.
there's, they're both together. They're both fulfilling a role in that exchange for each other, right?
Mhm.
So the outside viewer, what am I trying to
I
say?
know, no, I mean, I'm having images of people watching boxing, people watching the Roman Colosseum when
Yeah.
throwing a guy in there with the like, what is
Are
it
you not entertained? Sorry.
yeah. I mean, what is the viewer getting? I think maybe sexual gratification in this case, and also
Sure.
some control through the request. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine. Also remove, they're not having to do it themselves.
Hmm.
Like, I'm not a contact sports person. Hats
Sure.
off to you and my dear friend Cameron, who can do like Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I'm like, don't touch me.
Yeah.
I don't want to do anything where I have to touch another person or they touch me. And there's something like raw and like exciting about it though. Like I wish I was more of a person who could do contact sports. And so I'm trying to think about watching it. Is there a vicarious pleasure or like it's close enough? Is it some kind of exposure? Is it like, I don't know. I really don't know what the viewer might be getting other than, for in this case, getting off.
There's definitely an arousal. Like
Yeah.
we don't necessarily know that the kind of arousal. For some, it probably is sexual. For others, and I don't want to take away from the BDSM aficionados that maybe are also um, you know enthusiastic lifestyle BDSMers or who engage in it and understand it, that have an appreciation and want to watch this happen. I don't
Yes.
want to take away from that because I'm sure they exist. In fact, I think they do interview someone who speaks well on it. Who was a college student and a subscriber. Um,
Well, I watched Insex. I was not turned on,
no, me neither.
but I thought, wow, this is incredible. It's almost like watching someone give birth. It's like watching this person endure this incredible suffering, knowing that they pretty much signed up for it. Like I know there was some coercion and there's some pressures on them and the reinforcer of money changes the whole dynamic. But like there was something about watching this person make it through and kind of confront and take themselves to a limit, you know,
Yeah,
that was like I felt like I was like invested in them making it through. Like, and once they did, I was thank God, like that's done. And
yeah,
yeah, I felt yeah. So there's something. I mean, I think empathy. I think there's something about empathy maybe in there too.
yeah. There's and that's the thing. Like it's funny because Princess Donna was interviewed, and I actually worked for her at Kink, and she is definitely someone who very very much I mean, she wasn't just one of the models. She went on to become a rigger, so she was restraining. The riggers are the people that will like restrain, do the bondage ropes and pulleys and all that kind of stuff for the production. And Seven, who is Adriana Nicole, who is a performer that I worked with, and these are absolutely women that very much are uh, uh, in touch with themselves and what they like and what they want. They know what they are getting out of the situation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and and I have a lot of admiration because they're very much they know themselves incredibly well. Like when you can understand your threshold,
Yes.
and you also a lot of times with people in BDSM culture, not only do they fully understand their threshold, but they understand boundaries.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people out there in the world that don't have a clear grasp of what their boundaries are, and it's because they got there because they pushed themselves. Not saying that's for everyone. Certainly not even for me. I wouldn't survive well, maybe the whipping one. Maybe the only thing I could have done in that, but like I'm way too claustrophobic for rope bondage. That came later in life because I did a suspension thing once ages ago.
Mhm.
Um, could not do that now. But
What about those boob things? Oh my
no, that
God.
looks so
The boob
every
squeezing.
the boob squeezing really gets to me. I like I was holding on to my own boobs watching that, like just as though they were gonna fly off my body or someone was gonna run in and tie them up. I was like, no.
We
It
should
looks painful.
we should tell the viewer or listeners what we're talking about.
These women's breasts roped off, like squeezing them like they were balloons, and then they were like red because of like all the blood rushing to, oh my Lord, it was so
I
terrible.
know. Well, I think you're right. I mean, this is the thing. Like, I think BDSM, like people who don't understand it, really can like get very judgmental. But to me, it requires such a level of integrity and a capacity to really be clear and communicate, and then a real letting go. Like, I was reading about consensual non-consent, which I didn't really understand until now,
Right.
and how that's a part of it, and how like basically you're consenting, you're giving consent in a way about your non-consent. Like you're basically saying, I like it when I don't like it, and I want it even when I don't want it. Like that's what you're kind of like dealing with in that interaction, because there are going to be moments where if you're doming, I'm sure you've had that experience when you're doming someone and they're like obviously like in distress and having, you know, but but you have to really hold that they want that, even though they're
Yeah.
giving you like the signs, the nonverbal cues that ow, you know, or yuck, I don't want this. You still have to engage. It just requires such a high degree of trust. That's right. Yeah.
Absolutely, it does, and then of course, you know, with the consensual non-consent, because sometimes part of the experience is they want to scream no, they want to say stop, and they want you to override that, but that's because they're not using their safe word. When they use their safe word, you stop. Yeah, so they can say no, 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 and normally we stop when we hear no, but in the case of, you know, the experience that the sub is asking for, they want you to override that. Um, One interesting thing, when I worked at Kink, um, Kink is still around, kink.com, but I worked for them when they still had the Armory in San Francisco in the Mission, that huge building. And it was like, it was so big and all these floors, and it was weird because like you'd be walking down the hall and you'd hear like shrieks and things, and then in one room is like the Men in Pain shoot is happening, and over here is like hardcore gangbang and all this kind of thing. You're just like walking down this hall and these shoots are happening. But their rule was like, if you start crying, like as a sub, like let's say you start crying, um then what happens is the dom in the scene will go up to you, look you in the eye and say, are you okay? I'm checking in, you know, and you
Mm-hmm.
can let them know I'm fine. So like crying would be something that would elicit that, because they're like, if you're crying, maybe you can't say your safe word, so they check in.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's these different steps, and it's worth noting, in Brent Scott's shoot, like no one got seriously injured or died.
Yeah, it was
You
very safe.
it was the protocols were all set up. You know, it looks like anyone could die at any time, like the fucking water bondage shit freaked me out so bad. But like, you know, the protocols are in place, and they have to be, because it's all, I mean, at the very least, I mean, the liability involved. Um, so a lot of times when you're dealing with BDSM, it feels scary, it feels really dangerous, but there are a lot of protocols in place. And we're talking about professional, not
Mhm.
at home like Gerald's game. I had to bring up Gerald's game. Stephen King's Gerald's Game. For anybody that's not familiar, it's the whole book is about a BDSM experience that goes wrong, where the wife is tied up in the vacation house for the weekend, and then her husband, like, doesn't something happen, and he like dies of a heart attack, or he,
Yeah.
and then he's laying there and she's stuck in fucking bondage, and then she
Yeah.
like goes through this whole thing where she's remembering something, and that basically triggered this response from her where she was freaking out. And then there's a hungry rabid dog in the woods and a serial killer. It was Stephen King. But yeah, so that would be like an at-home BDSM session that went wrong.
Yeah.
For professional shoots, there's all sorts of safety protocols in place. But yeah, to get back to just the idea of observing other people's pain and suffering. It reminds me of I directed a movie with John Staliano for Evil Angel called Consent. And the idea is that we interviewed different models who enjoyed rough sex or BDSM, and why, and what consent meant to them. Because you could make the argument, well, is it really consent if these girls are crying, or where do you, at what point is consent withdrawn? Just consent can mean different things to different people. But we interviewed different models of kind of varying degrees of extreme. Some that really just liked it a little rough, and then some that liked medical fetish play. And we interviewed Casey Calvert, who is really amazing. I love Casey. She's a director, performer, and someone who very, very much is a BDSM submissive, like a power bottom. You could call her a power bottom. And she put it really well. She said, I think I experience pain differently than other people.
Mm-hmm.
And for her, it's you could say pain is pleasure for her, or that she's able to. She's also a really measured person. It's like she has such like a calm, level voice, and she really goes somewhere else. Like, it seems. I mean, she's present, of course, but she's somebody who really gets something out of being in like a subspace.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I should say, like, subspace is it's where the sub goes into so deep. Like, you want to like take care of them at that point. You don't want to keep administering whatever it is you're doing, like corporal punishment or whatever. If they seem like they're going somewhere else, you kind of hold on to them and you don't let them go any further. So you sort of like maybe even override, like you as a dom, you have to override what it is that they think that they can withstand and stuff. Again, the dom has to have like the good judgment there.
This makes so much sense, though, in terms of just variation in like our biology and our environments, like our histories.
Yeah.
Just makes so much sense that there would be just major differences in how we deal with pain and how we deal with power and all the things. But that makes sense to me. I think I read something about that just well, I know, it's funny. As a kid, I had a friend who she would get hurt and she would just freak out about the slightest injury. And I would always be shocked with how much pain I could take compared to her. So it does seem like one of those complex kind of, like, has to do with like our histories, but also pain tolerance might be some kind of just a neuro thing or a biological thing where we have differences.
Yeah. I wanted to also give like a more like a definition of subspace.
Oh yeah.
So a subspace can feel different for different people. This is what I'm reading. It's feeling light, floaty, or like mush. This feeling is caused by a rush of adrenaline or the body's flight or fight response, because submissives can be involved in impact player bondage, as seen often causes this rush of adrenaline. So yeah, you've got to be mindful because you don't want to push them too far. I actually had a director at Kink pull the plug on I was doing this thing called fucking machines. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm saying this. But
what is a fucking machine?
So it's a machine that you attach a toy to, like a dildo.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can control the speed and force, and it goes like in and out of you. Like, and I did it for anal, like like an anal sex thing. So I was ramping up the speed because I think in that kind of space of just taking it, and the director pulled the plug on the machine. So he was overriding because he I think understood that the I could get hurt,
Mm.
but you reach a point where, yeah, you do get that. And so that's another area where um the dom has to be mindful, because a submissive can get injured in subspace if they are, they keep going.
It's a
But
lot of responsibility. You have to be really attuned
yeah,
as a
and that's the
dom.
thing too, I think, with I know we keep kind of getting away from like what the observer is getting. I think what it is there isn't a clear answer, or there's
Yeah.
many different answers. But I think the important thing is that the observer should not be the one running the show.
Yes. Well,
Um,
it's an interesting dynamic because, right, Brent Scott is now motivated by pleasing the subscribers because there's financial gain for him in that, and maybe other things.
right.
And right, it changes his sort of allegiance, right? Like shifts his attention from, well, pulls on him in a way where his attention his reason for being there should be the sub, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it just adds that layer of his sense of responsibility or something to
Yeah,
which
he's being
party.
pulled in a lot of different directions. There's
Mhm.
there's obviously this sort of like, this kind of like avarice that comes from running a site that is now, bringing you literal millions
Mhm.
of dollars a month. And now you've got employees. Now you have, the ambition grows, because
Mhm.
now, as somebody who is primarily motivated also by sort of like these performance art, installations that he was like now doing and filming and doing live shows from and stuff. Like, it means more work, more responsibility, more models, more shoot days, presumably, more subscribers. And I mean, he says in the documentary, it's I became a monster. He doesn't specify in what way, but
Mhm.
I think we could conclude that it's he's going to end up overlooking things that maybe previously he wouldn't have overlooked.
Mhm.
Like, for example, that model being, humiliated and upset and scared. um you know and so that's the thing is, the he needed to be the one. I mean, yes, technically he's in charge, but um allowing the viewer that much power.
You know what? That yeah, I mean, this makes so much I just had this thought. I mean, in the act between two people, even if there are observers, if there's
Sure.
no like financial gain involved or even like notoriety or let me get the best performance, if there's no I think there was something about he was really more concerned with what he could get out of that performance, I
Sure.
think, than like what the actual person he was working with was needing from him. And I think, right? And it seems like they knew that. They're like, I gotta keep. I can't use my safe word. That was the general consensus was I can't use my safe word. I gotta just keep going and give him my best performance by doing things that are what's the right way to say that? Things that are more difficult or more painful or more I don't know. I think that they felt like they had to, well, for their own motivation to make more money,
Sure.
but also to please him, um, so he could get a good performance out of them for his viewers. Is kind of how it seemed like it went. Mo- Other, I don't
Yeah,
know.
no, that is
Yeah.
exactly it. It is, and that's when I refer to it as the illusion of power. And you see it
Hmm.
in porn, like we have these consent meetings where, the models are made aware, that the talent is made aware that they have the power of pause. They can stop a scene for any reason. They can, they don't have to move forward with the shoot if they don't want to, if they're uncomfortable at any point, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's true. Legally, a shoot cannot continue.
Mhm.
If a performer withdraws consent, the shoot cannot continue. But that said, if the shoot doesn't continue, that means the day is lost. And
Mhm.
that weighs heavy on a performer. It is weighed heavy on me as a performer. I can't tell you the number of shoots, and it's my response. I mean, at the end of the day, I have free will. I went into that shoot, but I went into it for the fucking money,
Mhm.
and I don't, it's not even just about me like doing the shoot and getting paid. It's about my reputation as reliable. It's about the crew that, some of them drove an hour to get to set, and they've got families to feed in this shit economy. And everyone there is counting on this shoot. And that's
Mm.
like the elephant in the fucking room.
Mhm.
And so I say it's the illusion of actual power in the scene. It's you've got people weighing on you,
Mhm.
and and I have to believe that for some of these models of Brent Scott's, of course, they also, some of them are there because it's fun. Some of them are, financially solvent but experimental, and some of them are broke and need the fucking money,
Yeah,
or are concerned about being a bummer and a downer.
absolutely.
So it is tricky when money enters into, when money is a variable in any situation, especially involving sex and our bodies and things like that. It's tricky. It's
Yeah,
really tricky, and it's easy
yeah.
to feel like shit. If you're not feeling good about the shoot, but you kind of feel like you have to keep going.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's the thing. And the observer is, the one that's paying for it. And it's interesting. I mean, we all love to watch. We all love to look at things. I mean, look at us on our phones, and we're watching things fall apart. We're watching, sex tapes and pornography and people getting shot at, like there's
Diddy's
that
baby oil.
yeah, there's baby, well, there's fucking freak offs where, somebody, I'm sorry, someone fell down because of all that oil during a freak off. Someone fell down. Someone was impaled on a penis because of that fucking oil
I can't.
everywhere.
I can't stop thinking of like a greased pig contest
Yeah.
or something like that. Like that,
Yes.
just like greasy bodies slithering around his mansion.
Well, that the pig nose thing that you saw like in the in Insex, the little pig nose hooks.
Oh my God, yes.
Do you think that any of the people had pig nose hooks, and then like the people at the freak offs were like chasing them?
I can imagine those freak offs had a diverse range of bizarre behavior, and that would be one of them potentially. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
We came full circle.
we did.
We came full circle. Oh man. It's, I'm gonna put it this way, just to because I feel like I should, we should wrap up the insects thing, which is, I without casting any judgment on anyone who's like watching these live shows or our subscribers, because obviously it's still in a position financially where I count on subscribers. There's absolutely no judgment at all. I would just say that we're all complicit in the things that we observe, whether paid
Yes.
or not. And I think it's worth asking ourselves, what is it we get out of watching other people, either in their suffering, with varying degrees of suffering. I mean, I watched Daily Mail ring camera footage of a girl that like gets a gun, walks out of frame. We hear a scream, we hear 3 gunshots, and then she walks back into frame and sits down and gets on her phone.
I
And I
saw
watched
that.
that. A girl that shot her and killed her mother.
Yep.
That's everywhere. Didn't cost me anything to watch that, but I basically observed someone's distress, and like we're doing that all the time. And I guess it's worth asking ourselves why we watch
Yeah.
things. Maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't, or maybe we should examine like how those things make us feel. I think it's just again a matter of just being more present.
Yes.
And I say that without judgment, of course, because I obviously like I get something out of it, but I'm wondering more and more now with how much is just out there that is constantly in our face, and we find ourselves sucked in. Like, why?
Yes, that's a good question. And yeah, what do you do with it? Like how do you let it inform your actions or how you show up in the world when you observe these things?
Exactly,
And why do you seek them out like me?
dude. So do I.
And I know we are ghouls.
I
We're a
know.
couple
I
of
feel like
ghouls.
such a monster sometimes. I do. Like it's and that's I'm you know it's interesting because we watched graphic sexual horror, and of course that took us down a variety of Reddit rabbit holes and trying to figure out these things about BDSM, and that nothing is more disturbing to me than that Daily Mail news item, which was just a regular like I'm like, what did I just fucking watch?
Oh, I know. I know. Just on your regular old channels. You don't have to go looking in the dark web.
I didn't even look for that. So it was presented to me on the Daily Mail TikTok. I was like,
I know we are witness to heinous things. I mean, I know we have to wrap up, but
yeah.
even the Hezbollah like pager explosions, all of that was just
Yeah.
out there for people to watch, people getting blown up. And I'm just
Yeah.
thinking, wow, like we really do have a lot of, I mean, this goes back to what I was saying about going down the wormholes or rabbit holes earlier. It's like we should be mindful about the images we're taking in and be and shoot and actually be conscious of the choices we're making rather than be passive and right because but yeah, I often wonder if I should refrain from taking in so much dark material and how it must be shaping me to be taking all that in. Yeah.
Yeah. And like you said, just to be conscious and consider, in the moment. I think the hardest thing, I think the worst thing is, like, well, to go back to what Susan Sontag was saying about like, do these images inure us or do they provoke empathy, sympathy? And I think we're inured to it. It's how we adapt, it's how we survive, is by kind of making it not real, or just we're just so um oversaturated with so much kind of despair that like each individual thing stops having its own kind of meaning, like the pagers exploding.
Right. You get numb to it
You
and
get
get
numb
like
to it because then,
calloused.
yeah, because 5 minutes later you're watching a girl, walk off camera with a gun and then hearing her mother scream as she's getting shot at.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing after another. It's hard to even have a moment to sit with one thing.
Yeah.
It's coming at us, and we're trying to survive it. So
Yeah.
we adapt, and we adapt by, I think, just not feeling it. Well, yeah,
Hmm.
being numb to it.
Yeah, and I see the empathy component too. Pema Chodron talks about. I think she's talking about her first teacher. I don't know who she was referring to, but somebody watched some boys stoning a puppy to
Oh
death.
God.
I know, and that her teacher uses that as a meditation, like a practice in working with like compassion and loving kindness, and because it evokes such a strong response of empathy and this, the sense of the destructive our destructive capacity, as humans to like divorce ourselves from our humanity so easily and, harm innocent animals and
Right.
people. But I thought, oh my God, every time I think of that, it breaks my heart. And so I think there is something about empathy that leads us into these darker corners, like especially with true crime. But you're right. I mean, it's at the same time, it's an exercise in empathy, but also I do feel like I'm getting calloused in the process.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a case of there's maybe not enough discussion about what these things do. I mean, certainly, we hear, like, I know how I feel coming out of, seeing stuff like that. And it's anxious, I feel
Yeah.
a lot of anxiety around it. Um,
Anger.
Anger, frustration, helplessness. That's a big one. You feel helpless to do anything.
To stop
Um,
it. Yeah.
to stop it and stuff. And one of the things I appreciate about having a podcast is, we choose a subject and we really explore it as a way to try to understand human beings. Like,
Yeah.
why do we do the things we do? And is there a way to approach it with a sense of compassion, even a little humor when it's warranted, and
Yeah.
and make sense out of it, because the world it's a beautiful place, but it's also terrifying and strange.
And brutal. Yeah. Oh, well,
I guess we can wrap up, and I guess I will go grease up my dogs and chase them around and try and catch them.
your little piggies.
Yeah, speaking of,
Slather them with baby oil.
and then chase them around and then slip and fall right on my face, like I'm sure people did at the freak offs.
Freak offs. Oh my God. Everything about it is so lame and disturbing at the same time.
I know, I know.
All right. Well, so listeners, if you would like to like us and subscribe and follow us, please do.
On X, we are
We are Secret Passage Pod.
right.
And Instagram, I always forget, Secret Passage Podcast.
Yes.
And then we will have a TikTok, and we will have a YouTube too someday.
Yes, and we'll let you know when that happens.
Yes.
Until next week.
Until next week.
Bye.